Welcome to the Underwater Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of underwater portrait photography, cinematography, and everything in between, with your host, Brett Stanley. Welcome back to the Underwater Podcast, and this week I'm chatting with Australian director Nase Baghai about his career in underwater filmmaking. We talk about his new documentary, Diving into the Darkness, and what it's like to bring the life of renowned cave diver Jill Heinerth to the big screen, and the many challenges that came along with it. Nase talks in detail about the creation of the film, what influences him as a filmmaker, and how he got his start underwater way back in film school. Okay, let's dive in. Nase, welcome to the Underwater Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
Oh, it's a pleasure, man. We've known of each other since I started the podcast. You reached out pretty early on, and it was such an awesome way to connect was through the podcast. So seeing you go from there and then from strength to strength with your new documentary has just been amazing to see that come about.
Thanks so much, Brett. I mean, I've been a fan of your podcast since its inception. I mean, to be on it is a real privilege and honor. And also, it's cool meeting another Aussie in the underwater film industry around the world. Yeah. So always a pleasure to meet another country, man.
No, totally. Because I live in the States and it's so very, US-centric that when I speak to an Australian, I get very nostalgic. So there will be parts where I'm kind of getting a little misty-eyed, maybe, I think.
Cool, man.
So you have been working most recently, probably your two most biggest kind of productions have been two documentaries on underwater. How did you get into the underwater world? What was your entry into it?
Oh, that's a long story that goes back, nearly 20 years from now. So it really started when I was a kid, and like most guys who do what I do, I was a huge marine biology nerd as a kid. So I would come home from school with a backpack filled with shark and whale encyclopedias. And my grandparents, who were visiting from Canada at the time, noticed what I was up to. So the next time they paid a visit, they gave me the 4-disc special edition of the original Blue Planet. And I watched it and was immediately spellbound by that show, not only because of the marine biology stories that were being told in the episodes, but also and perhaps more by the making of documentary that chronicled what the cameramen and producers were getting up to. And there was one image, I think it was Mike Degree in Cocos Island with his rebreather and big film camera housing, filming hammerhead sharks. And I was like, that is what I want to do when I'm an adult.
Right.
So the only problem was I was too young to do a PADI open water course at the time. So I had to wait until I could do that. And then I took a really long detour through the filmmaking path as a result of that. And that ended up eclipsing my passion for marine biology in the end, until during my first year at film school, where a classmate told me that she was shooting an underwater scene for her first year film. And I immediately put my hand up saying, I want to shoot that. And bear in mind, this is in the middle of Sydney winter with pretty tall waves and cold water. So it wasn't, and also I had a GoPro Hero 3 as my camera. So it wasn't the most auspicious gig that you could dream up, but it was, I felt like a pig in the mud when I was filming that. And as soon as my camera, as soon as my finger began clicking the shutter of the camera, it was a light bulb moment at that point. And after that, it was just a matter, okay, how do I learn how to do this professionally and sensibly? And I then decided to, merge what I was learning at film school about the craft of filmmaking with diving and, filming underwater. And here we are.
Yeah, it's such a common kind of path, I think, for people to get into underwater. I think I know so many people, especially guys who, when they were kids, they wanted to be a marine biologist. I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that itch to learn more. And recently, even though I'm not a big social media fan, I try to make my posts educational, include facts about the sharks and other like animals that I'll find to kind of give it like an educational spin on it and really tap into that, because it's such a, from a cerebral perspective, a really fascinating world to tap into, for me at least.
Oh, no, totally. And so is that why you ended up sort of going more into the documentary world as opposed to like the narrative feature film sort of world?
Well, to be honest with you, I actually started off in narrative rather than documentary. And to this day, I don't really see myself as a documentary filmmaker. I see myself as a director who happens to do documentaries. And it just kind of organically became the genre that I wanted to tell, simply because the best stories were the real ones. And part of the advantage of going to film school meant that I was exposed to all these amazing different, narrative stories from, Federico Fellini's 8.5 to Lawrence of Arabia or whatever. And that just kind of really inspired me to draw more inspiration from, fictional stories and films, and kind of not really treat my work as a documentary, but more like,
right.
For me, there was no reason that I couldn't draw from the vocabulary of like a Scorsese film or a Spielberg film for a documentary. So it was seen as heresy at the time by some professors, but for me, I kind of got off a bit of the mischief that came from blending all those genres into the documentary space. But yeah, it just, for me, like it was that the best stories that I was attracted to happened to be real people. And if it meant, going down the documentary path to tell those stories, then so be it.
Oh, no, totally. I mean, that's the thing the difference really between a narrative feature and a documentary is really that one just had a script written and one has a script that's evolving as it's happening, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really fun to, write something that can be really detailed and, if not prescriptive, but then when you rock up to the day, you have to, throw that out, because that's what happens when you're not only shooting a documentary, but also shooting underwater, and just think, okay, what are the core elements that we can't change? And what are the things that are more flexible and malleable that we can play around with, but still stay true to the story?
Yeah, so that's kind of, so it's interesting with the two main projects that you've done recently, which is Descent, which is the story of Kiki Bosch, the cold water freediver.
Yeah.
And then you've got the cave diver Jill Heinerth, who had already written a book about her life. Mm-hmm. What was it like going from, say, something like Descent, where you possibly had to find the story in there, to Jill, where the story was possibly already there?
That's a great question. Really, I actually personally, I loved both of them for different reasons. But if I had to, how do I say this? If with Jill's story, it was actually a really fun and pleasantly challenging hurdle to tackle, because first of all, Jill's an amazing legend in our community. And I kept having that voice in the back of my head, like, do not screw this up, do justice to the story. So
yeah.
There was that pressure. But secondly, when I read the book, it was just such a compelling story that I felt like that a lot of it was already there on paper, but the real challenge was thinking how I could use the medium of film in a way that wasn't as a slavish an adaptation could be. In other words, how could I take the best parts of the book, but use the format of a 90-minute film to tell the story in a way that worked differently to the way the book. And the way that we did that was we decided to do it in a non-linear way. And this really came about during the editing process in particular, as well as the preliminary writing process, because while telling it chronologically worked for the book, it didn't work for the edit, because we were showing our hand too early and revealing stuff that worked better in the non-linear format. And I really drew a lot of inspiration from Godfather 2 and, trying to rearrange these sequences in a way where it felt natural but kept the audience on their toes, and also just really made use of flashbacks in a way where it felt like you were getting to know Jill on film as you would get to know her in person. So
yeah.
And because Jill's such a really collaborative and, flexible person, having her as a guide, saying when I would ask her about, factual or historical questions, she was really helpful and imaginative and really respectful, for lack of a better term. And to this day, I haven't had a better working relationship with another writer, let alone a documentary subject, as her.
Oh, no, totally. I mean, it kind of comes across in the film. Jill is such a good storyteller in her own right. She's such a good speaker that it felt very cohesive. Like, it felt very intimate as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that made filming really easy, was because she had been on the other side of the camera before. That meant that she really knew how to, get the kinds of responses that I was looking for. But even like when you're planning shoots, I mean, she's the OG, or at least one of the OGs when it comes to, filming in caves. So having her as like what's the term? A conciliary for how to set up a cave diving shoot and to do it creatively too was a massive help for that.
Oh, no, totally. I mean, you've got her whole, life's worth of work, which is doing pretty much what you were doing with her in front of the camera. So you've got this resource, which must have been amazing to have. And she would have known the locations you were going to. And, so you've kind of, I don't know, like you got lucky with having so much knowledge with your subject.
Oh yeah, that's definitely an understatement. Like I still pinch myself for how fortunate it was to work with her throughout the entire 2 years it took to bring that film to life.
So how did it come to life? Was this something that you pitched to her, or how did that relationship start?
Well, Jill and I met at Oztech, which is the largest dive conference in Australia, about, I think, 7 years ago. And I went up to her. I was about 19 at the time and was just trying to make friends in the dive industry. And we pretty much hit it off the bat. And I kept in contact with her over the years, not knowing whether or not a project to work with her would ever come to fruition. But by the time the pandemic ended, I really wanted a project that would challenge me and enable me to travel and grow as a storyteller. And I had read her autobiography, of course, when it came out, but slowly as time passed, no one really went with the story, or at least announced they were going with that book. So eventually I thought, if no one else is going to do it, then I will. So
right.
I called her up on New Year's Day 2022 and I said, how would you like to bring Into the Planet onto the big screen? And her answer was pretty much an immediate yes. And I think the reason for that was because we knew each other well enough that she kind of knew the direction I wanted to go and was not the sensationalist, like typical Hollywood approach that they do it. And that I was going to prioritize fidelity to the source material above all else. So really about 6 months after I called her, we were in Ottawa filming her master interview that would kick off the scenes that we would film later throughout the year. And it really happened very organically. It was a lot of work to organize the shoots, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Oh no, I mean the experience of that must have been incredible. Not just, working with Jill, but also, I mean, I guess you had to get cave certified unless you already were.
Yeah.
You had to go to these locations and you seem like someone who likes a bit of problem solving, and that's pretty much what that all is, right?
Exactly. I loved playing Lego and chess as a kid, so I think that problem solving side of me definitely stems from that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I had to learn how to cave dive as a result of that, because I knew that being an armchair director that would just sit on the surface was anathema to me, given that I had a rebreather certification at the time. So
Yeah.
I remember telling my instructor, Ryan, not to take it easy on me. And I told him what I would be doing with Jill and the rest of the gang in Mexico. So I was not prepared for how brutal the cave course is, but I forced myself to get through it, because I just knew that A, it would better acquaint me with the source material, and B, it meant that I actually could be down there with the other divers and watch what was going on, and make sure that, you know, they had their general on the front lines with them. Because I said to them, look, I'm not letting you guys risk your lives because of a stupid film that I want to do. I'm coming down there with you.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, how does that, if you didn't go down with them, how would you get the shots that you wanted? Is it just a matter of giving the camera operators shot lists and then just hoping that they get?
That's a really great question, because there were some days that we had to shave down the crew to only 3 people in the water, simply because the caves were too small to fit all 6 of us. So the way that we did that was I would storyboard and shot list the shit out of it the night before. And we would meet in the dive shed every morning, and I would tell Yane Suhonen, shout out to Yane. I would tell Yane what I had in mind for the scene tonally and technically, in terms of like, okay, we need X amount of shots to cover, and this is what they need. And Yane would kind of interpret it in his own storyboards, and so that he too was like fluently absorbing it. And we had Jill, of course, there to, you know, corroborate whether the scene was actually true to what happened, as well as also the local safety divers and guides who knew the caves to say, okay, this part of the cave will work for this scene, but let's not go to this part of the cave. So there was actually one point where it had to be a smaller crew, because we had someone whose rebreather had malfunctioned midway through the shoot. So I said, well, this cave's too small to fit all of us anyway, so you take my rebreather and use that for the shoot. And I'm not going to lie to you, it was really torturous and painful for me to not be in the water and see what they were doing, but it did allow me to, you know, edit the sequences on the fly and spend more time reviewing the footage and, you know, coming up with scratch edits, as we called them, and coaching it. But for the most part, I tried to be in the water when I could to see how it was going and be there to, you know, guide the crew if they needed it.
Oh yeah, totally. So how many days was that you weren't in the water with them?
I'm afraid I can't remember the amount of dry days for me, but I can't.
More than one.
Yeah, it was more than one, but eventually I forced myself to just get comfortable with it and just think, you know what, this is a team, you know, effort, and you just got to do what you got to do to get everyone else to the finish line, and, you know.
Oh yeah, totally.
Focus on the film.
Yeah, I mean, were you like, I kind of just picture you on the surface, like, you know, walking back and forth and kind of wringing your hands like an expectant father.
Yeah, well, or more like I felt more like a heroin addict climbing the walls when I wasn't in the water.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed, like, you know, being in the caves actually. And because for the simple reason that it's the closest I've ever gotten to feeling like an astronaut on Earth. I know that's a line in the film, but it's the truth. I mean, when you're diving on a rebreather down there, it's impossible not to feel like you're doing a spacewalk.
Oh no, totally. I mean, the whole soundscape has changed from diving. You know, the constant stream of bubbles.
Yeah,
the way you float down there must be very different as well because of the closed circuit.
Yeah, the buoyancy is so different to scuba, but in many ways it's actually better for filming because I don't know if you've used a rebreather yet, but
no, I haven't.
Unlike scuba, your buoyancy is not affected by your breathing. So when you're hovering in the mid-water column trying to get a shot, it means that you can just be much more stable and not have to worry about whether your inhale or exhale will lift you or sink you. And I've been on scuba since that shoot, and while I love it, I'm just cursing myself for not having the rebreather at the moment.
No, I know that kind of feeling. Like, no, I haven't done the rebreather stuff, but I do every time I'm filming and I'm on scuba. I am so constantly aware of, what my breath is doing. And I'm kind of doing things that are not typical for me in terms of how I normally breathe because I've got to try and time it with the shot or the camera movement. And are we looking up and am I going to breathe into my own shot? It's such a... It's so limiting.
It's even worse when you're working with sharks. I remember in the Galapagos, a rogue school of hammerhead sharks showed up above me, and I was desperately trying to not hold my breath too long because I knew that the bubbles would not only scare them away but ruin the shot. But I'm just like holding it as long as I can. Yeah. And then 12 seconds in, I let it go and the sharks are gone in a flash. So that was one of those moments where I was just at the time I didn't have my rebreather set, but that was a moment that definitely pushed me to, think, man, I probably should investigate it now.
Yeah. But I guess with that, especially when you're cave diving, because you're in such a limited space and you really don't want to be, I guess you're fairly linear in terms of your depth when you're going through a cave.
For the most part.
Having the problem with breathing is, you're basically having to, adjust your buoyancy or your trim every time you breathe in and breathe out because it's going to push you up or down.
Yeah.
Whereas with the closed circuit, not so much.
Yeah, another advantage of the rebreathers that I learned while we were down there is that because it's a closed circuit system, you're not dislodging any silt from the overhead part. So that means that if it's just much cleaner and clearer as a result of that. I mean, there were some days where there were divers on open circuit side mount, but amazingly, Jill had the cleanest footprint for an open circuit side mount diver. Like it was
right.
And also her sack rate is amazing. Like she could easily belt out a good 2 to 3 hours on side mount and still not be worried about. Like I have no idea how she does it. Whereas I'm a guzzler.
Right. Yeah. And just for people listening who don't know, the side mount, just explain what side mount is.
Oh, sorry. So side mount is rather than when you have 1 or 2 tanks on your back, it's when you have 1 tank on your left side, like a harness, and another on the right side. So it's really designed for cave diving because of how it's a more horizontal profile and it's flatter too. So it means that you can, squeeze into smaller places that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get into with a large tank on your back.
Yeah, so it makes that kind of the caving experience a lot more easier.
Yeah.
And so when you're doing these reenactments, which is kind of where it was, right? Like Jill is narrating these events in her life and you're going back and filming these reenactments. What was that like for you as a director in terms of your vision of that reenactment and kind of what Jill's was? Were you guys on, sort of same page, or was she kind of like, oh, you just interpret it how you want to?
It was actually really fun and pleasant doing the reenactments with Jill, and it was really harmonious more than anything. And we were really lucky in the places in Mexico that we were filming that a lot of the caves were actually quite similar to locations that were not as readily accessible, whether it was like, Huatla in eastern Mexico or some caves in Florida that we couldn't visit. And because I had asked Jill what kind of details were in XYZ cave, when she actually rocked up and I double checked it with her, she was really positive and relaxed about it. And I think, but as far as like the scene construction, she tapped into it quite easily for someone who isn't really an actress. And I think, but for me as a director, I kind of wrestled away that taboo voice of like, oh, you shouldn't do reenactments. It disrupts the authenticity. I think the reason for me for doing it was because the alternative of just using photos or a talking head was not really going to do it justice from a cinematic perspective. Whereas bringing it to life with a film scene was much more fun as a challenge to bring it to life. And it was a real challenge trying to think about how to, place the camera in certain parts of the cave that also tapped into her psychology of what she was feeling at the time. Because we ultimately wanted to tell a character-driven story, but the reenactments were, I think it's a thing with cave divers is that we tend to be drawn to challenges and making the impossible possible. So I mean, storyboarding it and, planning it was really hard, but shooting it was a whole different thing. But I really owe a lot to the crew that brought it to life. I mean, Yane and Rich Stevenson, the two guys who shot it, Jill on camera, and Ari and Vincent, who are doing logistics and watching the whole thing. I mean, it really is a team effort. So as much as my ego would love to take the credit for it, I think I really feel like that it's a team effort more than anything.
Well, I think that's true for underwater in general. I mean, it's very hard to do a lot of the stuff that we do without a solid team.
Yeah.
How did you find these people? How did you pull this team together? Was it people you'd worked with before?
Well, I actually hadn't worked with any of them before other than Jill, of course. But when you're looking for, cave diving cinematographers who are master rebreather divers and have an eye for shooting and are creative down there, the list gets shortened pretty quickly. And the reason I handpicked Yane and Rich was because for many, probably the biggest reason was what they had done with the short film Dive Odyssey, which they shot in Oyama Mine in Finland, which not only is beautifully shot on an A7S II from a technical perspective, but most importantly, it pays homage to a lot of science fiction classics, Blade Runner, Alien, 2001, Silent Running, like you name it. And that kind of tip of the hat to science fiction was what I was looking for a stylistic perspective. And it meant that those guys really knew how to light and shoot the scene in a way that gave the film the right look that we were trying to achieve, because the film does allude to the parallels between space exploration and cave exploration. And I just knew that because Yane and Rich were first and foremost technical divers and cave explorers first, that meant that they were completely safe in the water and could just flawlessly execute the shots. Plus they had worked together, which is a really imperative thing. Like it would have been hell if they didn't know each other and didn't like each other and didn't know how to communicate. But because they did have that shared history, it meant that it was very easy for them to not get in each other's way. And it was a challenging shoot, mind you, but when I look at the footage, I have nothing but positive things to say about what they came up with.
Oh no, totally. And so how does communication work down there? So if you're on a rebreather, how is it just with slates and hand signals, or can you be on some sort of comms system? What's the
you
deal?
Can do comms, but there's a few risks involved to it. We ended up doing a mishmash of different communication methods. Like you can kind of talk on a rebreather, but it sounds like Bane from The Dark Knight Rises. Like
right, because you're talking into your mouthpiece, right?
Yeah, like I'd be like, "Yeah, can you move a little more to the left so we can?" I mean, we could kind of understand each other, but I did keep a waterproof notebook made by Halcyon in my back pocket at all times. So I mostly use that for ticking off shots, but I did use it a lot for communication. And we did use like tactile communication with the lights and hand signals. But honestly, a lot of it was preparation that we did before, like identifying what we wanted to do, where we were going to be. That kind of meant that we weren't faffing around in the water as much. So it's really, I mean, you do have to improvise a lot when you're down there, but if you aren't prepared when you show up to a cave diving shoot, then it's going to be a very nasty day in the water.
Oh, no, totally. Yeah, I think, yeah. I can't even imagine what it's like, you know, because I'm not a cave diver. I've seen cave divers. Caves freak me out. The amount of equipment you have to just to go in there safely freaks me out, let alone all the mental and logistical, you know, kind of gymnastics you have to do to even make it kind of safe. Yeah, it's impressive and kind of mind-blowing, but also nothing I would ever want to do myself.
Well, let me put it this way. I actually feel more relaxed in a cave than I do in the middle of the open ocean where the currents and swell's a bit dodgy, because it's so protected, and also it's easier to get into the water for some caves. And also there's no jellyfish or wayward animals as well. Like, and there's no seasickness. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love being in the ocean, but when you're on the OCD side and you're a little, you know, just wanting stability, sometimes you can get a little spoiled shooting in a cave or a sinkhole.
Well, I guess, and I only just really kind of thought of this then, is that the cave really is such a controlled environment, apart from, I guess, your own mental and emotional state.
Yeah, there are some caves where there is like a tidal, like a flow going in, and there is current in there, but that's mostly in Florida, whereas in Mexico, I didn't experience any of that whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, and I guess even in Florida, you know what you're getting yourself into. You know what those flows are like. It's not like it's going to suddenly reverse or something, or...
Well, at least you hope it doesn't.
Yeah, right, true. So I've spent a lot of time in the Florida Springs, and I know a lot of people there who have done a lot of those cave dives. And some of the stories from there in terms of, you know, the way those sinkholes kind of suck and blow and all that sort of stuff, it's really quite interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the strange thing for me, though, was that because I was a newly minted cave diver at the time, I reluctantly decided not to shoot with a camera, simply because I wanted to just be ultra safe and also focus on directing Yanni and Rich. But because I wasn't operating the camera, since that shoot, I've constantly had a real itch to scratch in terms of taking my own camera down there and shooting something again. Like, I'd still want to, even after what we went through in Mexico, I still want to go back and do it again.
I think, and so there is, I guess, I mean, for me personally, I love camera operating. I love moving the camera. I'm happy to be told where to move it to. I'm happy to be told how to frame the shot. But seeing that image move across my screen is so joyous. Yeah. Whereas I'm sure there's some people who are like, no, I don't want to deal with that. I just want to tell you what to do.
I mean, it's yin and yang. I mean, personally, I love having a camera in my hands. It's like it's the same feeling that I have when I've got a guitar or a bass guitar in my hands. And it's just like you're doing something that makes you feel like a craftsman. But all projects have different, you know, circumstances, and some require you to do sacrifices. So it is a bit of a pain to give it up, but if there's anyone that you want to drive that part, then who better to ask than the guys who ended up doing it. I mean, exactly. I mentioned Yanni and Rich, but also John Shaw, who shot the New Zealand sequences underwater. I mean, that was also really special for me because John was my on and off mentor for underwater cinematography for many years. So working with him was a really, really nice full circle moment.
So that's really quite nice, being able to bring people into projects like that. Kind of being able to sort of pay it forward or to bring them in so they can actually, be part of your evolving.
Yeah. I mean, it can get interesting at times because I spoke to, John and Yane and Rich and a few other underwater DPs that I've worked with, and they all told me that it was a major adjustment working for me. And because of the fact that I'm also an underwater DP. And I said, well, isn't that what you want as a DP? Like, surely having a director who knows the intricacies of how to, cam up underwater helps you. But they said, well, sometimes you can be too fluent. And I'm looking over at you thinking, why did you hire me? You should be doing this yourself.
Right, yeah.
But honestly, like, not only am I really proud of what they came up with, but I also really liked how I kept learning on the job. And there was never, even though I'm nearly at the 8,000 hour mark with filmmaking, I still feel like a Padawan learner every day I get up.
Well, I think, and from talking to people, like, a lot of the time that doesn't go away, and I think for a lot of us, that's what we're craving, is that learning experience every time.
It's a dopamine hit to a certain degree.
Yeah, I think, and it harkens back to that problem solving of, oh, okay, this is a new puzzle. Let's work out how to do this one. I've not done this one before.
Yeah, I think the thing is that when you look back and think, God, I did that. Like, I solved that problem. I would much rather go through the worst shoot imaginable and get some shots out of it than back out and not have anything to show for it. I think that, and also particularly in New Zealand, there was a real sense of camaraderie, and it was, or as we call it, like a real Kiwi spirit where we were all just like, working as a unit and just tackling whatever came at us, no matter whether the problem was big or small. And it's, you feel invincible when you're, just blitzing through shot to shot and it's finally working.
Oh no, I mean, there is that, I don't know, like I've always craved being part of a team. I used to watch the A-Team when I was a kid, and it was just like, oh my God, these guys have all got their separate skill sets and they all work together so perfectly.
Yeah.
And that's what I love of being on a film set or, on a photography set, of having skilled people who can do their job and help to create this massive, successful end result.
100%. You perfectly hit the nail on the head there.
So let's harken back to your earlier work, which is Descent. How was that in terms of crew and the size of the production? Was it a smaller?
Oh yeah, it was
bespoke.
It was nowhere as colossal as Diving into the Darkness, and I mean, it was my first ever film straight out of university, so it definitely pushed me in ways that I didn't expect. But I mean, for starters, like, I was, directing, writing, producing, shooting, editing, and sound design, you name it. But
yeah,
it was in many ways, like, it just felt really fun to, do it in, my home office and, really learn as I was going, and not really, there was pressure, of course, but it wasn't the same kind of pressure as I felt on Diving into the Darkness, having already done a feature. Whereas in Descent, I kind of felt like it was more of a sandbox in a way.
What do you mean by sandbox? Like something that was for you, you had to sort of work out how to make it?
No, just like something that I could really play around with and take risks and approach with a clean slate.
Yeah. So you didn't have any preconceptions. You didn't have any pre-made kind of methodology or anything. You could just kind of wing it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Of course, I had expectations and dreams of where I wanted the film to end up, but really it was just I treated it as a vehicle for learning the craft of feature filmmaking as opposed to shorts, because I had directed shorts before and I had, interned on feature films before, but I had never directed a feature documentary before. So it was, pardon this pun, it was diving into the darkness for me.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. That's beautifully brought back around again. Nice callback.
Just got to improvise that one.
So with your career in terms of, you started off, you wanted to be a marine biologist, and then you started to see, camera work and everything. Mm-hmm. What was your idea to be a director, or did you go through wanting to be a DP first and then? Evolved?
When I watched Blue Planet for the first time, I also watched Star Wars at the same time. So there was definitely that yin and yang of diving in film. But to answer your question, I think I always wanted to be a director, but I wanted to be a director who was involved in the process. As I said, like sitting in an armchair and not doing anything, not using a camera or editing was heresy to me. Like I couldn't, do that. So I felt like that by the time I got to film school, the goal of being a director persisted, but I do love being an underwater DP and also a dry DP as well. But I really I guess part of the influence that documentary filmmaking has had on me is that I like to work with a low footprint and unencumbered by the constraints of a big set where you've got like a gaffer or a grip and all these ACs and stuff that you need that can kind of lock you into what you're doing. But when you're doing like a wildlife shoot, the cinematographer is kind of the director in a strange way. So for me, it all depends on the project, but I think I'm a storyteller at the end of the day. So if directing is the means to do that, then bring it.
No, totally. But coming out of film school, you said Descent was your first one out of film school. How did you create that opportunity for yourself?
In the final year of my time at film school, I kind of began to find my footing as someone who wanted to tell underwater stories. So I kind of calibrated the last assignments that I had in that last year to really do the prep work for Descent and start thinking about who I wanted to work with, where I wanted to shoot it, and how I wanted to tell the story. And really, by the time I finished, I had most of the answers I was looking for. And it became clear that doing it through the, traditional studio method wasn't feasible, partly because I was a nobody and an unknown at the time. So of course I wouldn't have been able to do that. But also I knew that there were some EPs who just wanted to mold it a particular way that didn't jive with what I had in mind. So I just said, screw it, let's do it independent, find the money from wherever we can and do it. And if I have to, edit and direct pro bono in order to make the film happen, then so be it. But really, there was the only time I really, I only had barely had a break in between finishing film school and going straight to Descent. So it was like a shot out of the cannon pretty much.
Yeah. But Descent is basically the story of Kiki Bosch and her use of cold water freediving as therapy. Mm-hmm. How did you get onto that story? Did you already know Kiki?
I had seen a video of Kiki freediving in Iceland, and having been to Silver myself, of course I knew how amazing it was that she could do that. But when I met her in person in London, not long after that video came out, by the way, and she told me the full story of what had happened to her and why she was doing it, that's when I kind of had that push to want to tell her story. And similarly to Jill, I wanted her to be very involved in the accuracy and authenticity of the story. And I think because it was such a really small production. I mean, we were all staying in the same Airbnb, and Arrow, the producer, was also shooting in addition to me. So it just felt like a family home video to a certain degree, but
intimate,
with extreme underwater environments as the backdrop. So
was that film? Did you film the entirety of that, or did you have footage from other sources?
No. There were some DPs that did some things that I couldn't tackle for logistical reasons. Yeah. And a lot of the film contains stock, like archival footage from Stefan Andrews, who was Kiki's partner at the time and is a brilliant underwater cameraman. But I tried to shoot where I could, but I didn't want to, compromise the film too much by wearing too many hats. So there were some scenes where I let another DP spin the wheel for a change.
Right. But was it you? And so you had a small amount of archival footage.
Yeah, it couldn't have been more than like 18, maybe 20 minutes of archival footage. It wasn't the whole film.
Yeah. Did you have that archival footage when you were kind of storyboarding and you knew you kind of, okay, we can fill the gaps with this stuff, but we're going to need
kind
shots.
Of. Yeah.
Because I think with Jill's, like, she had such a treasure trove of archival footage for you to play with. Is that something you get excited about, or how does it feel?
I do, actually, because it's a fun challenge as an editor to see how you can make the footage more cinematic and, what's the word? Make it feel alive to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, like, going back to your question about the reenactments, because so many of those scenes did not exist on film, a lot of it came down to that task of thinking about how you could reshoot it from scratch, but bring it really, use the language of cinema, from the shot choices to the sound, to make it feel like you were living the moment with her at the time.
Yeah. And I got to say, you did that so well. I watched the film on a plane. I was coming back from New Jersey to LA. So I had it on my phone and I was just watching it.
I'm going to kill you for watching it on your phone. Like, it deserves to be watched on the big screen. Kidding.
No, I mean, I have a 65-inch screen in my house, but because I wasn't there and I needed to watch this film and I needed to kind of, corner you into this podcast, that I just needed to watch it. So I was just like, all right, this flight is the best place to do this. And for me, I really quite like watching things on small screens in a plane, because my tunnel vision just makes it my whole world, because the whole plane is dark. So it doesn't really matter so much. But what I kind of found was that I'd be watching it and I'm picturing you in my mind. I'm like, okay, where's he going with this? And I kind of know Jill's story. And there was parts of me that were like, oh, here we go. This is going to be tricky. How's he going to handle? Oh no. Well, no, that worked really well. So it was all these kind of moments where I was expecting there to be a bit of a stumble, just because of, how do you tackle this? But you did it so smoothly and so seamlessly.
Thank you.
It was just beautiful.
I really appreciate that a lot. I mean, I remember showing the film to Harry Connick Jr., who I met last year and became kind of like a friend. And he told me that when he watched the film, it reminded him a lot of what he does as a jazz musician on stage, in the sense of toying with the audience and taking it in a direction that you think it's going to go, and then doing a hairpin turn that ultimately achieves the goal, but does it in an unexpected, playful way. And I hadn't really thought of it that way, but when I think about it now, I'm thinking how maybe I must have absorbed that from, either some movie that I watched as a film student, or even as a musician, just like playing around on the guitar and playing some notes that took it in a completely different direction. But yeah, I really do try to keep the audience in mind when I'm editing something. And I remember having a post-it note on my editing desk when I edit it saying, if the audience does not squirm or gasp in shock when watching XYZ sequences, you failed.
Right, yeah. Well, I can tell you, I may have embarrassed myself a little on the plane because I say full disclosure, I'm highly claustrophobic.
Oh dear.
Yeah, and the scenes under the ice were giving me heart palpitations. So yeah, well done on that one.
I'm sorry to revel in your discomfort, but I'm very relieved to hear that it did the job.
No, I mean, it's mission accomplished, and also it was engaging the whole way through. I mean, kind of knowing the story already, I was kind of like, because I've had Jill on the podcast and we've kind of talked about a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I was kind of expecting to kind of go, yeah, let's move on. But it flew really well. And as you say, there were things where I was like, oh, he hasn't touched on that bit. And then we would go back and touch on that and I'd be like, oh, no, this is good. Like it was kind of like riding it was like riding a current. It was just kind of, I'll just go where you take me and we'll just see what happens.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I'll take that as a compliment. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And now the other thing as well that I really liked about what you did was a lot of the flashback sequences were animated.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration behind that?
Well, to be honest with you, it was really a combination of a logistical and a creative decision. I mean, the logistics of like going back to the 70s and the 90s and like finding an actress that looked like her, getting the props, getting the extras, the locations was just a pain in the ass from a producer's perspective. And also, I felt like that I had done reenactments with Descent before, showing Kiki as a younger girl and a younger woman, and I just had a gut feeling it wouldn't work for Jill. And the other thing was I had never directed animation before, and I really wanted the challenge of not only doing something I hadn't done before, but also using the limitless nature of animation to tell a story in a way that live action couldn't. And it was also another challenge that we faced was trying to have that right balance between, feeling nostalgic, but not rosy like a Disney Pixar movie. And on the other hand, having grit and maturity, but not too much that it felt like an out-of-place Batman graphic novel. So trying to find the right, or as we called it, the Goldilocks level of style for the animation was not easy. But the animators who were from Norway, I think they did a really good job of pulling it off.
And so how did you find them? Had you seen work of theirs before, or was it just through the research process you sort of found them?
Really through the research process. I went through about dozens of YouTube and Vimeo channels from young up-and-coming animation studios that had the right kind of style that I was after. And I saw a film that the Norwegian Somnium Animation Studio, by the way, that they had done. And I Zoomed with them and asked them about, various questions. And they asked me a few questions. And I pretty much hired them on the spot after that.
It was when the movie went to the animation sequences, there was a little bit of it was like, oh, but then it was like, this is fine. Like this works. Like it didn't take me out of the movie.
Thank you. I mean, I think the thing that I was trying to keep in mind, like there's many movies where you can clearly tell that it's just done to satiate the director's ego. And I was really trying to make a conscious effort of, forget what I want or what I want to indulge in. What's right for the story and the overall picture? And I talked to the other people on the team, and that just naturally came about as the solution to utilize. And it was very challenging. Again, like probably comparable to the cave sequences that we shot, but at the end of the day, it was a good learning experience for me as a director.
Oh no, totally. I mean, mixed media. I think it must be hard when you have so many options. Like going through all those Vimeos and through those YouTubes, you must have found so many things that you were like, oh, I want to do that, but is that right for this one?
Yeah, I
bookmark that for later.
I just remember that one funny story that I think Jill might have talked about this on her own podcast, but to get her likeness right, the animators asked her to take literally like 100 different selfies of her facial expressions, like look sad, look angry, look happy. And I also had Jill send over all of her archival photographs from her childhood to the animators, and so that they could just really tap into the details and bring it to life. And there's a scene with the National Geographic magazine covers and the backgrounds, and those magazine covers that you see were the actual magazines that Jill had as a kid.
Oh, right. So you managed to get photos or you scanned them.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, having access to that much collateral and that many assets must have been, a little bit of like a kid in a candy store.
It was definitely a kid in the candy store moment, and it made all those torturous days in the editing suite completely worth it.
Yeah, that's great. So what's next, Nase? What is have you got anything coming up that you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there's dozens of stories that I want to tell. It's hard to say when it will happen, and also, I mean, the industry is changing faster than we can keep up with it. So your guess is as good as mine is in terms of what will be happening in terms of the feature film industry. There's a lot of other projects that I want to, do that are not feature film related. And when we were making this film, I just fell so in love with technical diving and cave diving that's kind of something that I want to keep doing and, tell stories with. And yeah, honestly though, like it was fairly tiring spending 2 years, bringing diving into the darkness to life. So I would like to, take a bit of a break to catch my breath and, dive more and, see more of the world. But honestly though, like my brain's buzzing every day with like a new idea. And I'd really love to, do an underwater science fiction film similar to what, not identical to what Yane and Rich did, but something that kind of continues to bear the torch forward in terms of marrying those two loves together.
Oh yeah, that sort of stuff is amazing. Yeah, like bringing it back from the abyss, literally.
Yeah, I mean, every time I put the rebreather on and I look at the heads-up display and hear the breathing and also wearing a dry suit with the rebreather, it's begging to do it and like use it as a prop in a science fiction suit. So who knows what my mischievous director will come up with in the next few years.
Absolutely. So one last question, and I did pose this to Jill and I have posed it to a few other people, but would you go to space?
Hell yeah, of course I'd go.
You don't find, because some people answer that where they're like, no, water is all I need. Going to space is a whole different beast, but for you it's the same?
Yeah, well, Jill and I both have like a insatiable sense of curiosity and a desire to seek newness. So I think that I can't speak for her, but for me, I definitely love the challenge and the novelty of going into space. And I love the water, don't get me wrong, but I think that the little kid in me that watched, George Lucas, James Cameron, and Stanley Kubrick films would scream with joy at the opportunity to do that.
That's great. Awesome, Nase. This has been so good, man. I loved hearing your story, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with soon.
Thanks so much, Brett, and thank you so much for having me on this podcast, especially with all the royalty that you've had before me. So
it's totally, everyone fits right in, man. Everyone's got a good story. Everyone has a very different outlook on the same thing. So it's always good.
Yeah, thanks so much, man.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, if you like the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. If you'd like to support with the production of these episodes, you can purchase our very cool merchandise at theunderwaterpodcast.com. We've got branded coffee mugs, stickers, beer cozies, and posters featuring our amazing illustration and logo by Joe Hodino. If you'd like to connect with us or learn more about our guests, you can reach us at theunderwaterpodcast.com or on Instagram. We also have a Facebook group where you can discuss the episodes and even get your questions answered by our guests. There's a link to it in the show notes. Also, don't forget about Waterproof magazine, showcasing the best in underwater art. Read it online or purchase a print edition at waterproofmag.org. You can learn more about my underwater photography workshops and mentoring at brettstanley.com or Brett S Photo on Instagram. The Underwater Podcast is presented and produced by me, Brett Stanley, and our music is Neo by Oh Boy. Keep creating, everyone. I'll see you in the water.